I'm Redbord, and this is TRM Talks. I am Global Head of Policy at TRM Labs. At TRM, we provide blockchain intelligence software to support law enforcement investigations and to help financial institutions and cryptocurrency businesses mitigate financial crime risk within the emerging digital asset economy. Prior to joining TRM, I spent 15 years in the U.S. federal government, first as a prosecutor at the Department of Justice, and then as a Treasury Department official, where I worked to safeguard the financial system against terrorist financiers, weapons of mass destruction proliferators, drug kingpins, and other rogue actors. On TRM Talks, I sit down with business leaders, policymakers, investigators, and friends from across the crypto ecosystem who are working to build a safer financial system. Today, I sit down with René Michau and Esme Hodson of Standard Chartered. But first, inside the lab. Some really cool news to report. TRM's chain abuse platform has recently been named the official reporting partner for Operation Shamrock, a groundbreaking initiative focused on disrupting cybercrime and helping law enforcement seize illicit funds. This partnership is a game changer for victims of crypto scams and a big step towards building a safer financial system. So what is Operation Shamrock? Operation Shamrock is the first and largest cross-industry coalition aimed at tackling transnational organized crime, especially the epidemic of pig butchering. Pig butchering scams prey on people by gaining their trust, often through fake relationships, and then convincing them to invest in fraudulent cryptocurrency platforms. According to TRM, in 2023 alone, over $12.5 billion was sent to addresses linked to scams and fraud. Operation Shamrock works to educate law enforcement, support victims, and develop practical tools to stop these crimes in their tracks. Erin West, friend and executive director of Operation Shamrock, described the partnership with chain abuse as a game changer. She said, quote, "By consolidating victim reports and linking cases, we can identify and target large-scale fraud networks. Together, we can stop scams and build a safer financial system." And now, Standard Chartered's René Michau and Esme Hodson. Today we have a very special TRM Talks. I am joined by René Michau and Esme Hodson from Standard Chartered. They are leading the digital asset. René is the global head of digital assets. Esme is the Chief Compliance Officer for SC Ventures. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks so much for having us.
I do have to start with one thing. So you're wearing like pretty much the coolest shirt. There's this big red crab in the middle, and there's a bear and a bull that's kind of like gray on a black background on each side. Tell me what the shirt is about.
One of the things that we find ourselves in crypto world is we have a couple of mantras, right? So we all want a bull market. We want everything to be running upwards. We save our bear markets for building, and we all huddle down and like make stuff. One of the interesting things for the last little while is we've been in this very sideways movement from a price perspective, particularly on the BTC price. So we're just crabbing along sideways, man. It's that's what we're doing.
I love it. Yes. Not bull, not bear, but crab. Look, before we kick things off, I would love to hear about your personal journeys. Esme, why don't I start with you? You really have spent a lot of time in the crypto space and now kind of bringing that expertise to Standard Chartered, the SC Ventures team. Talk to me a little bit about sort of your journey.
Sure. Thank you very much again for having us. I've had a great time getting here. I did intend originally to be an archaeologist, and I did train as an archaeologist. So, as you can imagine, it's been a long and varied journey. I was a civil servant. I was a regulator. I worked in traditional finance. I moved to about 4 countries to do that, helped to build a digital bank. And then I moved sort of adjacent to that, probably the steepest learning curve of my life, into a blockchain company where I helped to build a large institutional digital assets exchange, a regulated one. And now I get to combine the best of all those worlds with my portfolio, SC Ventures. And so we look at everything all the way from venture building, investing in fintechs, and sort of providing technology and capabilities for the bank and our ventures. So that's pretty exciting. I think the bonus to that is obviously at Standard Chartered, I get to keep up my interest in digital assets. I'm very passionate about financial inclusion. I'm very passionate about understanding in a reasonable way the benefits of digital assets, and also some of the drawbacks, if there are any, and how we manage those responsibly.
Thank you so much. Renee, same question. You have this really interesting journey. We were talking about the shirts, but it's like you've spent much of your career, most of your career in TradFi, a number of really important financial institutions, and yet you were really, in our space, a bridge between DeFi and TradFi. How in the world did you end up in this situation?
Mainly because I didn't know anything, right? So that's probably the starting point. Look, I think that point, that Esme made, that sort of value in service was something that I was interested in, but also that kind of curiosity around like how can stuff work better? So I've worked for banks for almost a quarter of a century now. And the question I've always had and where I've always found myself is asking questions around A, how does this work? And B, how can we make it better? I mean, one of the examples of something that had the opportunity to do in Australia, working for National Australia Bank, was to build the first carbon trading desk for an Australian institution. And that went live in late 2008, early 2009. And shortly afterwards, I had the opportunity to then move, I ended up in transaction banking and payments. And I didn't know anything about payments at all, right? So I found myself in a job where I didn't really know probably anywhere near as much as I should. And so I had to become a human sponge. And it was a really interesting time in both the internet and in financial services, which kind of it should foreshadow why I've ended up in the job that I'm in today. But 2008, 2009 was really interesting because you had Twitter was really starting to kick off. You had quite a lot of the idea of blogs and RSS feeds and this kind of aggregation of information. So I just kind of fell into this deep, dark rabbit hole of fintech before it was called fintech. It was about the time when the very first fintechs were happening. So you had Brett King was working on Movin. We had Bank Simple as the sort of two challenger banks at the time. The online lending platforms, the first of those were really taking off. So Kiva.org, which was socially orientated, and Zopa, the Bitcoin white paper had come out. So it was this really interesting period in financial innovation where you had a lot of innovation happening. And there was this kind of view from my perspective that there was a way to do all of these things a lot better than we were doing them today because of how we could leverage the internet. So that really piqued my interest in fintech and crypto. And so 2009, 2010, I would say is when I started that journey, and that kind of became a bit of a hobby and figuring out how to do things. And that sort of stayed a hobby really until 2017 when it became my full-time job. So I was able to set up a sales business within Standard Chartered, focus on fintech companies. And we focused on how can we best support these hyper-scaling companies that were doing really innovative stuff around payments and do that in a compliant way. And I think that's kind of been an important part. And we started to think about, okay, well, even if we do nothing crypto related ever, we would be exposed to some form of crypto asset risk. So we started to think about what a risk framework needed to look like, what business opportunities were presented by that, and starting to think about how we would fit into that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Like, I think that the unicorn that you are is really like you have people who are very good at technology and you have people who are very good at finance. There are very few people that are really able to marry those. And it sounds like that's been basically your journey over the last decade or more. So look, Esme, I think this is like a great jumping off point for you because like what Renee is leading at Standard Chartered and what sort of you're building as a business is something that you're charged with protecting. Would you talk to me a little bit about your role specifically, what you're doing day in and day out from like a compliance perspective?
Sure. So I think there are sort of two aspects to this. So obviously there's the aspect I do in my role as the CCO for SC Ventures, and so digital assets is one of our high conviction themes in ventures. So we have a number of live ventures that are based around digital assets, Zodia custody, Zodia markets, and a sort of a tokenization platform that we're building as well. So on a day-to-day basis, I think what I'm looking at there is really the difference between the risk frameworks that we've already got and the risk application that we've already got and the compliance controls that we already have and what we're building in. But anything that needs to be adjusted to either uplift that for digital assets or take into account some of the things that are inherent in digital assets, which actually help to mitigate the risk. I think sometimes there's an immediate assumption that all compliance controls needed to be added to for any kind of digital asset, when actually I think you need to see it in terms of its features and what that is actually providing you with the sort of the risk mitigation of the outcome of that. So that's an exciting prospect on a day-to-day basis. In a sort of a wider role across SC, What I really help to do, I think, is to tie together part of the way that we look at our risk framework for digital assets across the group. Now, I do that with lots of very talented colleagues, and I think that we've got quite a robust sort of risk framework and process around how we look at our digital assets. But I think it is very important that when you are looking at that, you're looking at it consistently. We are a bank with a large footprint, with a very varied footprint, and we need to make sure that we are sort of in lockstep with our business and that we are consistent across all of our portfolios in the group in the kind of things that we want to deliver through our digital asset strategy. So whether that's tokenization, whether that's interoperability, whether that's sort of consumer protections, all of those things, they're the sort of central tenets of all the things that we're working around. So, but I don't think any compliance function can sort of operate by itself.
I love so many aspects of this answer. I think two that really jump out at me are one, the idea of compliance as a business advantage. And the other point is leaning into technology, right? The native qualities of public blockchains allow us to do compliance. This is all we ever talk about at TRM, right? In sort of way more innovative ways than you can in the traditional space. And maybe that's why regulation maybe needs to be different around financial crime, because we now have more visibility on these transactions.
I think it also concentrates people in a different way because I think when you can lean into the technology, when you can lean into the analytics, when you are provided with that information that is transparent, I think it's the element of having to really upskill yourself or understand what judgments you're going to make over that information and what decisions are going to come out of that information. But I do think there is a balance though. I think it's one that people are still calibrating towards how they are approaching those decisions, especially in financial crime, because I think in fiat, especially, we're not used to the volume of information and the ability to overlay. I mean, and it's very popular now, but the ability to overlay AI onto your investigations to enhance those and to find patterns that you could not spot as a human.
Love that last part about really leveraging the technology to include AI, and really every day there's a new innovation. Renee, you provided sort of a really nice overview of the way SC has engaged in digital assets really, since 2018 or even before. Could we dig in a little bit? One of the things I was really taken by was just the breadth and depth of the different work streams that are going on within the bank. Can you talk a little bit about like the areas that, if you're global head of digital assets, sort of like what are the areas that you're really thinking about across the business?
Yeah. The great thing about that question is that we don't think about digital assets as like a new business or something different from who we are. So throughout the history of Standard Chartered, we've focused on connecting developing markets to the global economy and vice versa. And you can see that through our footprint, right? So we're in 54 markets, mostly in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. We're in lots of places that you might not expect a UK headquartered bank to be. So we've got this experience of having to deal with complex problems to provide economic connectivity. When we think about digital assets, this is just another complex market where we are providing a bridge between the global economy and this emerging market of digital assets. So that includes crypto, and it will ultimately include tokenization as that becomes pervasive. So let me then perhaps illustrate what impact that has on the organization. Let's look at our risk functions. So Esme and one of our colleagues, Gwenda, have done a really great job of thinking about how digital assets might impact all of our existing risk types. We have specifically not classified crypto or digital assets as a risk type, as just another risk. What we've said is that all of the risk functions within our organization need to have some subject matter expertise and tools and technology to be able to manage the same risk, whether that's credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, whatever it might be, financial crime risk, and compliance to the same level of effectiveness as we would for the rest of our business for anything that involves digital assets, right? And so that means then that overarching the entire organization, we've got this density of folks that are thinking about how digital assets impact the risk profile of Standard Chartered. So that's been, you mentioned, as a competitive advantage, and we do think of it like that because it means that we can have sensible conversations about the actual risk, and we're not managing risk via Bloomberg news articles or Reuters news articles. Like we're actually looking at the actual risk that's being undertaken. So then what does that mean commercially? So think of Standard Chartered as kind of three main business lines. We have an institutional bank, which is kind of where I live, even though my responsibility is global. We have a retail and wealth business that also supports SMEs. And then we have SC Ventures, which is a corporate venture capital, innovation, and venturing business. So with respect to digital assets, the great thing about having the SC Ventures structure is we've been able to do things in that part of the bank where a bank license may not be the best way to do that. So the launch of Zodia Markets, the launch of Zodia Custody, the launch of Libera, which is our digital asset ventures, have enabled us to look at the problem they're solving. So pure play digital asset custody in the case of Zodia Custody, brokerage and exchange type offerings for crypto in the case of Zodia Markets, and a tokenization platform in the case of Libera, as very discrete problems and wrap the right governance and commercial models around that for those things to exist as a business. But in order to do that, we've had to bring our management team and board and risk functions on the journey to say, this is what this business model looks like. When we're looking at a crypto custodian, we need to think about the provenance of tokens. We need to think about the risk rating of various wallets. This is a new problem and a new way of thinking of old problems. So the way I like to think about the digital asset ventures in particular is they have acted like a spinnaker for Standard Chartered, where they go out in front of the organization and then help pull us forward. So in our institutional bank, we have a financial markets business, we have a transaction banking business, and we have our sales and coverage business. So the ability to understand digital asset risk has meant several things. For the client coverage business, it's meant that we can selectively bank participants in the digital asset ecosystem. So we support some of the largest exchanges in the world. We support some stablecoin issuers. And we do that in a way where we have a due diligence standard that allows us to onboard them. And we have the right kind of governance to be able to demonstrate really thorough due diligence on those firms. And we work very closely with those partners to ensure that everything's happening in the right way. In the same way, with our product businesses, we don't want to really be doing that many things from a digital asset perspective that don't have commercial value to the company. And that's not to cast aspersions on any of our peers or the work that anyone else is doing, because I think lots of people are doing great work in this space. But each of our product businesses has someone who's responsible for digital assets. And we're constantly thinking about, well, how does the ability to do something in crypto, the ability to do something as a digital asset, how does that help move that business forward? How does that support our clients and how does that generate revenue? And so, we're putting Bitcoin and Ethereum on our FX desk. We've launched digital asset custody with our security services business. And that really means that we've for our institutional clients who've been asking us for safe and well-regulated access to this asset class, we're doing what we would do with any other asset class. So what it really lays out is that the way we think about this is it's something that affects our entire business. And it's something that we want to continue to invest in so that we're building all of the processes, risk management, building the muscle to be able to deal with digital assets as part of the way we serve our clients and the way we operate our business.
Esme, in each of these specific areas, I heard, offering crypto assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum. I heard custody. I heard tokenization. Can you talk about what are the compliance challenges in those categories today, and how are you helping mitigate some of those concerns?
I don't think digital assets compliance or regulation happens in a vacuum. So I think quite a lot of the issues that affect digital assets more widely a couple of years ago, you see rolling forward into some of those different categories. So I think obviously it's a fast-paced environment when regulators necessarily look at something that was very popular maybe 2 or 3 years ago. By now, the industry has moved on. And the regulators have kept a very deliberate pace to make sure that the regulatory frameworks they have are sustainable. They're fit for purpose. And I think that there's one of the challenges we have is the asymmetry between the speed at which people want to innovate, especially in this area. I think it matches the velocity of the transactions, the volume of the transactions you can do, and the difference between the pace of regulatory change. I think one of the other things, especially that we experience in digital assets and tokenization, is that, again, we don't have a unified global view of how we should be treating this.
That's such a cool answer, and it really does give me a whole host of other questions to ask. But let me ask you this one. And René mentioned all the places that you operate as well. How big a challenge is it today, just given the lack of sort of global standards? How do you think about that when you're thinking about engaging in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, in Europe as well?
I think you're quite right, Barry. So I think how we work through that is that I don't necessarily see that people and the financial institutions should be tailoring their business to regulatory arbitrage. I think that's probably a very limited business opportunity, and it doesn't fit in with the kind of things that we are looking for in our digital asset strategy. So that doesn't make them safe, it doesn't make them scalable, it doesn't make them sustainable. So I think what we really need to do is that we find the delta between what we already do and the principles we already apply to building things, to our risk frameworks, to our assessment, all through the life cycle of that product, and then the application of those products or services. And actually that reduces quite a lot of the, if you like, the differences, the perceived differences. I think it's quite easy to look at that and think, this is completely overwhelming. How am I going to reconcile 54 different approaches towards something? But actually, you're not reconciling 54 approaches. You've got one approach and you're seeing where that fits in with the 54 places that you are operating in. And then you're seeing where it's best suited. And then you're looking at sort of, if you like, you're pushing it down a funnel. So every time you're filtering out something so that you can make it more specific to a certain jurisdiction if you have to. You can say this is not appropriate for that jurisdiction, or you can say, actually, here are lots of opportunities for financial inclusion, payment networks, the utility of distributed ledger technology. So I think it's less about the differences and more about what is similar.
Standard Chartered is part of the MAS, the Monetary Authority Singapore Project Guardian program. Esme, something that you do that is so cool and honestly so near and dear to my heart is the way you're really working to empower women in the space. I certainly am on a policy team with two extraordinary women that run circles around me. Talk me through the work that you do and why it's important in that space.
So I think one of the things to acknowledge, first of all, is that René is also at the forefront of this. And I think partly it's principle and partly it is the practical actions that you take. Because I do believe that you can go and you can, as you say, you can talk about diversity, you can talk about gender diversity, but actually you need to do something yourself. What are you doing? How have you been of service to that? So if you look at digital assets, the whole point is democratization, financial inclusion. It's not financial inclusion for rich people who work in banks. What we need to do is we need to extend that principle or ethos to everything in digital assets. Now, it is a multifaceted thing, but there's a place here for women as leaders. There's a place here for the intersection of women as leaders in digital assets. I do think that especially at the beginning, the culture of digital assets are the one that, if you like, the Instagram culture of digital assets, which was everyone sitting on a Lamborghini and
Crypto bros.
well,
Yeah.
indeed, crypto bros. And I think there was an element there, as there is with anything. Some people want to look at the asset and some people want to join the community. And for me, I think that it's about making sure that you are not pulling the ladder up behind you. I think it is very easy in this area to gatekeep knowledge. And the idea has always been to help other people. So I'm quite an active mentor. I'm on the blockchain mentoring program for Evandi, but I think it's also about making sure that there is a pipeline of people behind you who can see you, not just what you do, but you are also judged by what you don't do. So I've got to benefit from opportunities that my grandmother could have only dreamed about. I tell this story quite a lot, so I don't know whether it's quite on the money, but my great-grandmother signed her marriage certificate with an X. She was illiterate. She had 15 children. And if I could go back and say to her now, these are the opportunities I've had, that's what I'm hoping that women get in probably less than 3 generations. That means something quite fundamental to me.
in over 100 episodes, that might be the best answer I've ever gotten to any question that I've asked on this show. So no, thank you so much. It's incredibly important and obviously so meaningful. And if I can answer that in any way, it's that like we want to help, we want to be part of that. I famously was the first male member of the Association for Women in Crypto, and it was because it was just like, hey, yeah, of course, this is something that we do together. And René, it's awesome that a couple of ridiculous old bald guys are trying to provide some help in this space.
Oh, dude, I'm not helping. I just know who's smarter than me.
Well, that's what I try to say all the time. It's like, look, I don't want to walk into a panel and have to sit there for an hour and listen to a bunch of like guys talk. Like, you need different views. Like, you need different, like, it's just better, right? Like, that's always been my argument is like, this shouldn't be forced. It's just better if you just do a little work. You'll have better panels. You'll have better speakers. We'll have better conversations. Like, we should all want this. And that's kind of like where I ultimately land there. To that end, obviously, Esme, it sounds like you're spending a lot of time on this, which is amazing. René, you're spending a lot of time on video games and probably boating. But in all seriousness, like I have found like you need things in the world that we live in today, like especially with the work that we do. Esme, I'll start with you. Like, what are those things for you?
So somebody did once describe me as somebody who would not be a bored retired person. I am an absolute serial crafter. So I will pick up any hobby. I will learn it. I love learning how to do things.
René, same question.
So look, I mean, one of my favorite things, and this podcast is part of that. So the thing I love about the space of fintech and crypto is nobody is doing stuff in this space to make the world a worse place, right? So you got a bunch of people who are applying intellect to solve complex problems to make stuff better. And the opportunity to have that intellectual discussion is kind of like one of the fun things. Now, I love hanging out with smart people. I love, talking about interesting things. And I just love, nerding out. Every now and then, Esme and I have to kind of pull ourselves out of a very deep, nerdy black hole so that we can actually get back on with what we're supposed to be doing. But that's part of what keeps us going.
Thank you. This was such an amazing conversation and really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having us, Ari.
Thank you so much.
I know I always say this, and it's sort of like a parent with their children or something. I think this was one of my favorite conversations. It was really extraordinary. And honestly, we kicked off with René hearing how the most sophisticated actors in our space are working in a traditional financial institution in order to engage safely with digital assets. So I thought my favorite part of the conversation was actually having René, who is really building in incredibly smart, sophisticated, novel ways, with Esme also, who's saying, I'm going to keep that safe. And to me, that's like what's so important. It's on the one hand, we're building, and on the other hand, we're building in critical infrastructure around compliance and safety and security. So I loved the dichotomy of having them both in that conversation and really playing off each other. René is simply one of the sharpest people in the space. And really the genesis of this conversation was we were talking at point zero, and he's really telling me about all the things that they are building in the digital asset space at Standard Chartered. And I was taken back. And I said, wow, we really should have this conversation. And it was just so cool that played out in real time today. I also love the fun. I think when I'm thinking about this conversation right now, I love thinking about the t-shirts and just really the energy and excitement that René and Esme bring to this space. And even throughout the conversation, I could just tell that like what gets them energized is having these types of discussions. And like, there's no better guest you could ever have on TRM Talks than someone who really gives off that feeling. Next on TRM Talks, I sit down with Caroline Horace of the U.S. Treasury Department. If you love the show, leave a review wherever you're listening to it, and follow us on LinkedIn to get the latest news on crypto regulation, compliance, and investigations.
TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. This episode was produced in partnership with Voltage Productions. The music for this show was provided by Ecolix.
Now, let's get back to building.